Hey, Emma.
Yes, Madelyn.
Did you hear that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back to Marvel?
I sure did.
Did you also hear that, Mark Ruffalo is also going to do a new series of movies about the Hulk?
No.
Set in, Norse world?
I didn't.
Do you know what that's called?
What are they called?
The Banner Saga! Welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I too would do anything for $750 million or whatever, host Madelyn.
I'm your scavenging host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week, we're talking about the Banner Saga, which is not about the Hulk. Although, the Hulk would be at home.
There are... one of the primary races, I guess, is sort of Hulk-like in stature.
So it is kind of Banner-like.
I don't think they're green, though.
A Banner... They could be.
I think from looking at the game and stuff, I don't think any of them are green.
But they could be. And Crow Country. A game in the long line of Madelyn games that I thought had a title that was slightly different than the actual title.
County? Did you think it was County?
Crow County.
It's not Crow County.
Neighboring Donut County. Crow Country. Crow Country. Crow Country.
Yes. I also frequently think it's Crow County, but it is not.
It probably I was like, it's a theme park. Crow County is a weird name for a theme park. Crow Country
is also kind of a weird name for a theme park.
Yeah, but a theme park being a country feels a little bit more normal than a theme park being a county.
Fair enough.
That's just my... Take that marketing advice and take it right to the bank.
Okay, I will.
First, though, we gotta talk about the Banner Saga. Speaking of going right to the bank, the Banner Saga, which does have a "the" in front of it, I think,
yes,
is a tactical RPG from developers Stoic, published by, I think it's Versus Evil. This seems to have been autocorrected to Versus Email.
Yeah, no, it's Versus Email. Evil.
Same thing. That came out for PC and mobile in 2014, and then eventually for various consoles from 2016 to 2018.
Yes, it's also the first in a trilogy, which has long-ranging choices and consequences, which makes sense when you realize that Stoic is 3 former BioWare devs.
A BioWare-vania.
Exactly. A BioWare-vania. A Mass Effect-vania. I don't think... When did Mass Effect come out?
A Metro Effect.
They specifically worked on Star Wars: The Old Republic at BioWare before leaving. So, a Star Wars thing. Does that track?
Does not tell you anything useful about the game.
No, it does not.
So, the Banner Saga, before I get into all of my things about the studio and how it was developed and whatnot, I also want to say, I just don't seem to be able to read. This is an episode that is a theme of, I can't quite read. Mm-hmm. When I was opening up the first page I was opening about the Banner Saga, I read it as a factical RPG.
I think you're tired.
Maybe. I am really tired. But I was like, oh, an intellectual game. Factical.
You have to know facts tactily to deploy them.
The Brain Age is kind of a factical RPG. When you think about it.
Exactly.
I think that there's something to that. Anyway, the Banner Saga is, you're doing RPG things in an RPG world, but this time it's Viking Norse-inspired world. Yes. And in this world, there are humans and there are giants called Varl. And also, recently, there's no sun, and there are things called the Dredge, who are humanity's, ancient enemies back from the dead. Not, they aren't zombies, I don't think, in the very literal sense that we will get to later in this episode, but they are eldritch horrors.
They remind me of, knowing very little about Game of Thrones, honestly, but they sort of have the, what are those guys called? White Walkers?
Yeah.
They sort of have White Walker vibes.
I will say that this game, there's a lot of Game of Thrones thrown around in the discussion marketing of this game in a way that is timeless.
Yeah.
You know? Just doesn't hit differently now at all than it would have hit in 2014.
People like the vibes of Game of Thrones still, I think, right? We talked about it.
That Game of Thrones is bad. I'm just like, wow. Hearing this, like, this game was like Game of Thrones has
when
a slightly
did we talk
different
about
tone.
Game of Thrones? Was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
What?
About, like, you're saying, like, I wish there was more, like, tactical games that were, like, balance the political maneuvering better.
Yeah, and I don't remember what game that was.
Oh, I was talking about Unicorn Overlord. I think.
That's what it was.
Yeah. So maybe this is what you're looking for here.
Being real, I did sort of like eventually go, I'm going to stop reading the synopsis.
Yeah.
Now, partially was that because I can't believe I'm about to be like, I can't read again for like the fourth time in 4 minutes. But I struggle to follow Wikipedia-style plot summaries of these kinds of wide-ranging tactical RPG or like fantasy RPG games.
I mean, understandably, yeah.
They're so name-heavy. And so much happens so quickly. And oftentimes when I'm preparing for the podcast, I go, shouldn't spoil the audience. Good thing I don't understand it because I can't read. That's not at all how that meme works. But I give myself the excuse of not wanting to spoil you, the listener, in order to let myself off the hook of understanding more than the first third of the plot of any of these games.
Right.
So, that third, dual protagonists. We know I love a dual protagonist.
Yeah.
This game did seem like maybe a game that I would enjoy, potentially. If I vibe with the combat, which seemed to be the big sticking point for people of if you vibed with the combat or not.
It's interesting sounding.
It is. So, there's dual protagonists.
Are you mostly Rook, though, for most of the time?
I think so, but...
Yeah.
2 characters that you play as. And you're like, in one of these sides, you're supposed to take a human prince to the Varl capital for the purposes of cementing an alliance, but like, the Dredge show up and he gets killed. And then fun RPG stuff ensues. On the other side of the world, there's like villagers who they encounter the Dredge because they've like destroyed their village, and they also sort of like happen to team up with a legendary Varl warrior, and things continue to ensue from there.
Yes, so for context, this world is essentially one that has already experienced Ragnarok. So it's sort of like inspired by Vikings and Norse stuff, like post the end of the world in Norse mythology. So it's somewhat bleak in tone and in sort of difficulty of getting through as well.
They picked Norse here, which now feels a little trite, right? It's like, oh, another Norse game. You can tell from the reviews that was not the feeling in 2014.
Yeah, I will still say that, like, Vikings specifically, I guess there's an Assassin's Creed now, but besides that, I don't think there's a lot of, like, Viking-themed games, Although you could argue that this isn't even really very Viking-y by the end point, but that was their initial inspiration, was Vikings.
It's just interesting in the same vein as, reading that it's sort of Game of Thrones-y feels quite different than it would feel reading that in 2014. My reaction to, like, it's a game inspired by Norse mythology is quite different now than it might have been in 2014.
Sure.
Because they definitely talk about it as, like, this is something different that we're doing. Like, we didn't want to do the thing that everyone else was doing. We were tired of elves and dwarves, so we're going to do Norse. And somebody saying that in 2024 would be like, okay, I guess you played God of War.
Anyway, you said it was a tactical RPG, but it really, like, is kind of a classic Talk This mashup.
Mm-hmm.
They took, like, Oregon Trail and, like, a tactical RPG and sort of smushed them together.
They really don't want you to do the Fire Emblem thing.
Oh, what do you mean?
Of, like, resetting.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's it's more designed for choices and consequences to begin with. Also, the tactical RPG battles do not have permadeath. So when you're in, like, a tactics thing and somebody gets knocked out, that doesn't mean that character is dead. Rather, characters die because of choices that you make in the story and on your travels instead.
Can you imagine if Fire Emblem did that?
It'd be a different game.
I know.
So
I'm just like, can you imagine if you're, like, running around the camp and, like, the character gives you two choices and one of them, now they're dead. Like, you picked the wrong answer at tea time. They're dead now, buddy.
They've abandoned you because you really insulted them at tea time.
I do also have to say quickly that I feel like we've talked about a lot of games in the relatively recent Talk This Past that are overtly inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics, which I feel like I ought to play now, just because every time I read this, it's like, this is inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics, and I'm like, yes, a game I am familiar with.
I'm still, there's constantly the rumored remake or remaster or whatever of Final Fantasy Tactics, so I wait. I do not fire up any sort of strange program on my computer.
You would never.
I would never. But anyway, so yeah, you have this sort of, like, Oregon Trail parts where you have, like, large groups of people that you're traveling with, like civilians and warriors, and you sort of, time passes and you make your way from place to place. Events happen on the road that you have to deal with. You can rest every once in a while and, like, do things in your camp. And then every once in a while, there's, like, story scenes where you have to make decisions as well. And then you might get into, like, a tactical battle. Which is the system of, like, every unit has turn order, like in Triangle Strategy, versus, like, the player phase, enemy phase in Fire Emblem. So it's like each character has their turn order and wait time and stuff like that. What's sort of unique about the system in the Banner Saga is your health is also tied to the damage that you do. So as a unit's health goes down, they are also able to do less damage, which sort of logically makes sense.
It does. Right?
I watched one video, what was his name? He had a very charming, very southern accent. Longbrow Gaming was saying, like, yeah, if you take, like, 12 punches to the face, your punch is probably not going to be as good after that, which, like, yeah, I see it. But it's definitely a different choice for these sorts of games when you usually have, like, a unique stat for various different things, right? So you can put some armor on, so you might have to deplete an enemy's armor bar, or your armor bar might get depleted. And then your actual health is also tied to, like, the amount of damage you can do to an enemy unit as well.
It's very, like, Golden Age Disney animation style as well. They talk in every single interview about how, like, Sleeping Beauty was the main style inspo, which is really sweet from a studio that is all, like, men. It sounds like
men can't like Sleeping Beauty.
It's just interesting, right? I don't think of Sleeping Beauty as, like, a go-to Disney boy movie.
Sure.
Come for me.
But it's very much about, like, the backgrounds of it, and the backgrounds of Banner Saga are very painterly, I guess.
So this was a game in the Madelyn school of, oh, this could never happen now. Indie.
Yeah.
TM. That really was for a large portion of at least the early development, like 3 dudes from BioWare.
Yeah.
And
pretty much.
3 dudes who were like, we're tired of how it feels to work at a big company making a big game.
Yep.
Tale as old as time.
That part does still happen, for what it's worth.
That part still happens. They actually, I read in one like tidbit of an article that 2 of these guys first were like, let's keep our jobs and let's make a children's book for iPad together. That'll be fun. And they did that. And then they were like, okay, let's make a game.
Yeah.
But this, and they talk about this in some interviews as well, like, this was right at the moment where you had the ability to create a game and get it relatively directly to the consumer. I mean, you still had to move through more Steam approvals than you do now. But especially for these guys who had been working for years in the kind of like very big business AAA sphere, it's interesting to think about, you know, not just how this changed like the existence of indie games, but how it created I don't have to make games in this one corporate way path for people as well, in a way that was more, if not exactly like accessible, more like you could explain to someone how it might be done.
Yeah. The first one was also Kickstarter. They did a Kickstarter for it. They made enough, I guess, off the first one that they did not do a Kickstarter for the second one. Did not make enough off the second one, and so returned to Kickstarter for the third and final one. I believe now they're working on a live service title. Godspeed, guys.
Wah, wah, wah.
Godspeed, guys. I wish you the best.
Hope you had fun for a while. I do have to say, it was interesting. It made me think of this, you know, as someone who is deeply invested in at least 2 series that will never end. Mm-hmm. Fascinating to have somebody make a trilogy that is a trilogy.
I mean, it's very BioWare.
Sure. Not saying it's unprecedented.
I know. They got that from somewhere, I think. You know?
They did. But it did call it to mind to me and draw my attention to how uncommon that is in games. Not just a series that ends intentionally, but a series that is even beyond that, intentionally plotted as 3 or whatever. Like, I feel like so much of the time it's like, this game did well, so we gotta make another one.
Yeah.
Not, we're planning to release these 3 games.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very true. Obviously with some exceptions. Mass Effect, you know. Yeah, because I do think with games, it's like, oh, we've just got the funding to make this one thing, right? And then we'll see how it goes. And like, you have to be, especially if you're an indie developer, right? You have to be very confident in yourself, I think, to be like, yeah, this will be a trilogy, you know, or this will be 4 games long.
Well, these games in particular were really right place, right time, like very targetedly right place, right time. It was fascinating to read some of their discussion about how their thought process about the Kickstarter evolved. Like, the original plan for the Kickstarter game was that they were going to kickstart $10,000 to like outsource some help for some of the animation, basically. And then before they like set up their, and like they were like, oh, like maybe it should be a little more than that, like maybe it could be 30. And then Double Fine had just like a totally paradigm shifting Kickstarter that they ran, where they like raised $1 million, so far beyond what their goal had been, so far beyond what anyone thought was possible to raise on Kickstarter. And that put for these guys like, oh, like actually if we only raise $30,000, people are going to think this is a dinky little game. which is a funny way to think about a fundraising goal. I would love to be in a position ever where I'm thinking about a fundraising goal where I'm like, well, if I only raise $30,000, people are going to think I'm pathetic.
Yeah.
Like, how about, I would just love to have your $30,000. Or they were like, okay. People are going to think this is like a serious game. Like, the goal's got to be 100,000. And then they made that day one and they raised $750,000.
Yeah. Honestly, I think I suppose now, like, Kickstarters might be somewhat prepared for it, but it's kind of scary to me to think about, like, setting, like, a goal, you know, like, whatever, $100,000 or whatever, $100, and I get 7 times that, right? Because then you have to figure out, like, what you're doing with the money, right? And it's just, like, an interesting, I feel like it would be a stressful question sometimes if you weren't expecting that response particularly.
Certainly. And it's certainly in this case, I think in ways that seem to have been mostly exciting for them, but led to a game that was originally planned to be released in 2012. Seemingly, I'm sure this wasn't entirely it, they were a tiny team, some level of delay was probably going to be inevitable just because that's what happens on these kinds of projects where they're like, we can fund it off of our savings. Like, they always take longer. We just talked about this with, I played the game. They all lived in an apartment together.
Octodad.
We just talked about this with Octodad. So there's some level of delay was inevitable, but it sounds like the majority of the delay came down to, well, we have all this extra money, so we have to add extra features, so this is going to take longer to make.
Yeah. Makes total sense to me.
They also announced in the Kickstarter that it was coming to Steam before they had that approval.
Put that pressure on Gabe.
That is what happened. They raised a bunch of money and Steam was like, I guess.
Yeah. Gabe was like,
like, you got me.
Foiled.
You got me. Also a 2014 artifact. I'm in like a loop. I feel like there are like Madelyn arcs to talk this. This is a game that they were originally developing intentionally for mobile.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
We liked mobile back then.
For 2 years.
It did come to mobile. It's on mobile. It's available.
Is. I'm not saying this isn't a game that could be on mobile. Just fascinating, this sort of game, that they were like, it's going to be mobile. And they only switched to doing it somewhere else, which was hard, by the way, because their engine was, like, not designed for it. Mm-hmm. Because it, like, didn't work very well on iPad.
Yeah, different time. Different time when we thought premium mobile games would work.
This game just, like, is so 2014 in its creation. Like, 3 dudes quit their AAA jobs. They raise, like, almost $1 million at random, seemingly. More, like, it's a cool sounding game. I don't mean to be like, oh, money was just falling from trees. But, like, it does feel a little bit like they raised money at random. They quit their jobs. It happened to work. They released it at a moment where you could still be planning to make a premium mobile game and, like, have any version of that you expect to do well. Like, crazy.
They worked out of a tiny little building.
They did.
I think one of them called it a goat shack or something.
They did weirdly candid interviews about that experience before the game even came out.
Yep.
They outsourced the voice acting to a voice studio in Iceland that specializes in Old Norse. But then they recorded it in English. That's like, we don't know what to do with this money kind of money.
Yeah.
They're like, let's hire the Iceland guys.
Get that bread, Iceland, you know? Why not?
At the same time, though, their mocap was filming and rotoscoping themselves and, like, their wives.
Yeah. I saw at least one of them pretending to shoot a bow and arrow, which was funny.
Anyway, the kind of game that you sort of wish there was still the space for something like this.
Hey, the tactical RPGs are still hanging in there.
They're back,
kicking.
baby.
They're kicking around. Well, anything else about Banner Saga? Or should I say, speaking of, we're back, baby.
I'd still like a factical RPG. I'm going to come back to that in the mashup.
Okay.
I'm tempted to play this. It's on the old Switch. It's on the old PS4.
I think they released it as like a package too, like as the trilogy.
If only it had some local multiplayer. I love when things are released as a package. I historically latch on.
Right. You could play a multiplayer probably.
You probably could.
I think next year is just going to be the year of the tactical RPG for me.
2025.
Yeah. The tactical and the factical RPGs.
Do you think they'll release a Rectangle Saga?
What?
Sorry.
From Triangle Strategy?
Oh, did I say Saga? I meant Rectangle Strategy, yeah.
Oh. Maybe. I don't know.
That's how I'll close. The Banner Saga, I feel like missed an opportunity by not having just like totally insane subtitles for 2 and 3. It's just the Banner Saga 2 and the Banner Saga 3. And I feel like your responsibility as an RPG is having some kind of insane subtitle that nobody actually says.
Sure.
Speaking of things that are crazy. Speaking of things that nobody actually says, like the word zombie, Crow Country.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of things kicking around, making a resurgence.
That's true.
This trend has been around for longer than I have been paying attention to it, to be fair. But Crow Country is a very PS1 inspired survival horror game.
We talked about this when we did our horror game episode a little bit.
Yeah. It's 1990. You play as Mara Forrest, special agent, who's investigating an abandoned amusement park. Not just amuse park. I skipped a syllable in there. Called Crow Country, near Atlanta, apparently. And so she's there searching for its mysteriously disappeared founder, Edward Crow. I guess that's why it's Crow. I didn't really think about that before, for some reason.
How did you not think about that? That's the first thing I thought.
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, she finds out that there's a lot of weird, dangerous creatures in the park, as well as several other people here also investigating for various reasons. So you walk around the park, you confront various monsters, you solve various puzzles, and you figure out the mystery behind Crow Country. Very classic survival horror setup, minus maybe the amusement park.
And classic survival horror look, classic survival horror tank controls, classic survival horror, pretty much all of it.
The look apparently is at least a little bit inspired. He said in interviews that it was kind of indirect, but ended up close enough that he feels like he was inspired by Final Fantasy VII, the original.
Big week for Final Fantasy inspo.
Yes, because she's very like chunky, Mara, right? In terms of like she's made up of chunks, I guess.
Yep.
Which is very much what the Final Fantasy VII characters looked like. Although Mara is more like intentionally constructed, I think, than the Final Fantasy VII guys. But also sort of like the vibe of like the background and angle and stuff also comes a little bit from Final Fantasy VII. But most of it is very Resident Evil, classic Silent Hill inspiration.
Something that I thought was an interesting update on the genre that in the spirit of some of our conversations about difficulty and difficulty modes seemed to have been implemented in a way that people felt positively about, is that this game has a survival mode and an exploration mode, which are in many ways what they sound like. The survival mode has combat. You like shoot your various guns at the zombies, which are not called zombies. They're called guests. Which is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
But also, can you imagine if a game came out and it's just called Zombies Zombies?
To be fair, they don't really look like zombies.
I know they don't, but spoiler, they are.
Yeah, but I wouldn't like... I saw one screenshot. It was in a Remap Radio article, interview with the developer, and the caption was like, "Oh, those are some long legs. Will this make sense in a few years?" But it's very like spindly, long guy, like daddy long leg spider type looking thing. So if I was in a theme park and I looked at it, I wouldn't go zombie. I'd go, what is that? What's that thing?
Fair enough. Big year for horror with long legs.
Yes.
Too. Something in the water. But there seemed to be like quite positive reaction to like exploration mode where there's no combat. That it seems like, at least in the reviews that I read, that people felt like it still somehow managed to maintain the feel of the game while taking away some of the like more 90s classic, this is frustrating elements.
They did also add a hard mode after release, because people who are more, hardcore fans of this did think it was a little bit too easy.
Sure.
So they did end up adding a hard mode that is a little bit more stringent in terms of your use of ammo, because even the standard mode isn't exactly hard. But yeah, he Adam Vian said he saw like a tweet one time that was looking for mods that would turn off the monsters in Silent Hill, because they just liked hanging out there. They enjoyed the vibes.
You should talk to your therapist about
I know. To be fair, Silent Hill is not always a manifestation of your inner demons. That's just Silent Hill 2.
Sure. Still not like a hangout place.
Sometimes, I think that is what people like about PS1 horror, though, is the hangout vibes. So,
Really? What is wrong with people? That's not allowed to be your cozy game. Sorry. I don't make the rules.
But he saw a tweet like that, and he was like, that seems valid. So they ended up putting in this exploration mode, which apparently, there's references to the monsters in the story, so they added some, like, dead monsters on the ground so that you could get a sense of what they looked like and that sort of stuff. But occasionally there is, like, a wall will break and theoretically a monster is supposed to be behind it, but in exploration mode, it's just like, well, that wall just exploded. And he said, sorry, too, in the Remap Radio interview where they asked him about it. He also said it's like, in his mind, it's like an AU where Mara gets there like 1 hour later. And they've all died of natural causes.
Nice. I think something that these two games this week have in common is, in some ways, like a lot of praise for and a real focus on story. Like, also, like, quite specific gameplay, of course. Specific gameplay in service of a given genre or an homage to a given game with updated updates. Mm-hmm. But this game, I mean, some crazy twists and turns, I gotta say. This was a plot summary that I did mostly follow. And some crazy things happen. And I'm not going to tell you what they are, but they're crazy. But similarly in reviews, seemed to get, surprisingly to me, because I was like, this story's crazy. Like, it seems to get pretty positive response for the story and like the feeling of the twists and that sort of thing. Which again, they must be well done, because some of them sort of felt like, oh, okay, when I read them out of context. but like more mixed response to the gameplay of it. Still great reviews. And like similar thing for the Banner Saga, right? I think like some relative praise for the story, the combat a little more hit or miss for people. Kind of same idea here.
I think that, I mean, did you read reviews that found it difficult? Because the main complaint I saw about this was that it was too forgiving, actually.
Yes, I don't mean that it was the same complaint of the combat, just that it didn't quite hit.
That's like I said, that's partly why they added the hard mode. I think there's also some complaints about like just the controls feeling a little bit awkward. They did.
That's the point, kids. PS1
Sorry?
Tank. Have you ever played Resident Evil?
Well, actually, again, this was addressed in one of the interviews. Is he says he came up with this himself first, and then remembered that the Resident Evil 1 remake also does this. But he was originally having Tank and found that like it feels good on D-pad, right? Which is what PS1 controllers only had. They did not have the analog stick, and does not feel good on analog stick. So, in similar vein to what the Resident Evil 1 remake did, D-pad is mapped to tank controls always, and an analog stick is mapped to modern controls always. So you can either pick, good feeling modern controls on the analog stick or good feeling tank controls on the D-pad without having bad feeling ones of either of those ever available to you, which is a pretty elegant solution. It is, honestly.
Twice as much work for yourself.
I mean, if you're going to implement both anyway, which you do sort of have to do for if you're really, going for that PS1 aesthetic, I do think.
This game has got to have a tank option.
Especially if it's very, Resident Evil inspired. I think it has to have the tank controls. I've never used tank controls. I sort of theoretically know what they are, but I have not used them. The character will continue walking forward if you hold the forward button, essentially, even if the perspective changes.
Yeah.
Is my understanding of tank controls.
Yeah. How much in your life do you think would have to change about you and your life situation for you to end up the owner of a theme park named Paquette Country?
I think it would just be built on the remains of, your storage empire, right?
Oh boy.
When your storage empire goes bust, I would build a theme park, and then that would also go bust, and I would mysteriously disappear. And you would be there in the haunted theme park being like, I remember when this was my container empire. That's a very survival horror character.
I don't think we've told the listeners about my theme park, my
theme park now.
my theme park. Yeah, Emma doesn't have one, but Paquette Country is real.
Someone who's just hanging out, talking about how the place they are used to be their storage empire does feel like a very survival horror character to me.
I am going to say that downstairs in my building, there's a retail unit that keeps turning over, and it is storage now.
Haunted.
Should I buy it out and open Paquette Country?
I think maybe it's haunted if it keeps rotating out.
So. It was a ghost delivery place for a month and a half.
A ghost delivery place?
Yeah, it delivered ghosts.
2 ghosts, or did it deliver ghosts themselves?
I'm legally not allowed to tell you.
Oh, okay. Good.
I thought Crow Country was going to be very different than it was.
Yeah? What did you think it was going to be like?
More crows.
More crows?
Maybe I had this idea in my head of I feel like there's a Twitter cartoon series that's crows. Have you ever encountered this?
I don't think so.
It's Crow Time, I think. And the crows have whimsical adventures mostly.
No.
Sometimes touching. That occasionally gets served up to me on various social media platforms. And I thought it might be like that.
I don't think so.
It's not. They aren't cute little talking crows.
They're kind of cute looking.
Yeah, but this wasn't what I went into this thinking like Crow Country sounds like it might be a game because it was in this like indie explosion that I might want to play. And then I came away from it and was like, it's not.
Yeah. I might want to play it. I don't know. I liked Signalis, so...
I just think that it's likely not to be my cup of tea.
Well, you don't really play horror games, period.
That's right.
So, I have only recently expanded my awareness and mind to the horror genre, so...
Emma's baby gamer brain.
I played Resident Evil 4, and now it has... I actually don't remember, did I play that or Signalis first? I think it might have been Signalis. I played Signalis and my brain opened. That's what happens when you play that game.
The comic is called Crow Time. It's on Webtoon. It's not anything like this. It's about crows.
Is it like that comic where there's like the really loud bird and the really quiet bird?
Sometimes, maybe.
And people put in like song lyrics.
That I don't know.
That's the only comic about birds that I know.
You seem to... Oh, I think I know what you're talking about, maybe. And, like, vaguely, and that kind of, like, there's an itch in my brain as you say that. And I'm like, I feel like I can almost seeing what you're talking about. I think it has become clear over the past couple of episodes of Talk This that you maybe encounter a different corner of meme culture than I do.
Yeah, probably.
You were like, the French fries thing. Everybody knows the French fries thing. I was like, what are you talking about?
I didn't say everybody knows the French fries thing. I asked if you did. I didn't know if you would know.
My boyfriend, he was like, I have no idea what this is.
I do find, maybe we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I do find, like, the big fascination and, like, focus on, like, PS1 type horror games to be so fascinating. Because there really is, like, I was looking at this a little bit. There's articles from, like, 2022 on this as well. So it's been going on for a while, of, like, this sort of big indie scene really into, like, sort of PS1 aesthetic type. And, like, it's worth saying that none of these, like, PS1 aesthetic ones really look like PS1 games. I read there was a few interviews where, again, the main designer on Crow Country was like, yeah, it doesn't really, like, look like a PS1 game. It's, like, evoking the feeling of what a PS1 game looked like. But it's just interesting what we choose to, like, sort of the things we become nostalgic for, right? But especially in the horror space of, like, more sort of vagueness in the presentation, I guess, allows for things to be a little bit scarier sometimes than being able to see every single strand of Leon's beautiful blonde hair, you know?
Here's a spicy take from me, though. We've got to be approaching... I say this knowing that it's wrong. We've got to be approaching the end of people's ability to, like, ape retro styles.
What do you mean?
I mean that the graphical difference between PS4 and PS5 is negligible.
Right? We haven't even gotten to PS3 yet, Mel.
I know we haven't. I'm not saying there aren't so many. I'm just saying that, like, the style gets less distinctive over time.
That's fair. Yeah.
And, like, even if someone is going to make, like, a throwback to some kind of PS3 era style of game, that visual aesthetic, well, there certainly are, like, some of those that exist. That visual aesthetic becomes both much less monolithic, but also just much less distinguishable.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you take things sort of as a whole, and in fairness, like, this is very much like a horror focused thing. So I think also if you look specifically at genres, if you narrow it a little bit more, even if the hardware limitations aren't forcing specific styles, there's obviously going to be trends, right? And sort of aesthetic sensibilities that catch on in the same way that, like, fashion or art does that, you know?
Of course. I guess I just mean that I think that the aesthetics that are forced by hardware limitations are overall, in my gaming experience, much more distinctive than, like, genre trends. And so I think the idea of us, like, 10 years from now being like, oh, everyone's making PS3 style, I don't know, like...
It's all very yellow again.
Yeah, like, everybody's making, like, yellow Borderlands. Seems like we wouldn't necessarily talk about it in that way, in the same way, or in the, like, this is Resident Evil, that has to get thrown around. This is Resident Evil Silent Hill every single time one of these games comes out.
Sure. Yeah.
There's nothing quite that iconic. We start to lose the ability for something to be quite that iconic.
Well, I think it might just cycle around again, you know?
That's true. We'll just go all the way back to it's Pong.
Oh, no, I mean, like, the things being released now will now be creative touch points for people making games 10 years from now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying. That we are just going to be, like, reflecting this back at ourselves until we lose track of what the original thing is.
Yeah, like fashion.
I understand. Yes, that makes sense. That's not what I meant. I meant that, like, games that look like 2024
sure,
are going to have little to pull from.
Although I feel like there's a big, like, right now we're seeing a big, like, cel-shaded trend and, like, limited frame rate trend. So maybe that could come back around in, like, 10 years from now.
I hope that in 10 years we see a return to characters that have slightly dead eyes.
Yeah,
mouths,
the 2D...
And mouths that don't move quite right.
The 2D PNG eyes?
Yeah, and mouths that don't quite seem like they're attached to their faces correctly.
I do find, you know, find it charming, the switches between the detailed faces and the low poly faces in Kingdom Hearts. So maybe that's the point of inspiration in the future.
Here we go. Yes, the pre-rendered cutscene versus, like, makes a return.
It's not even the pre-rendered cutscene. Like, in Kingdom Hearts 1, like, between shots, they change the type of face that they're using on the model.
They do. Let's see more of that. But first, let's see some MASH. Some Monster MASH. Some guest MASH.
Yeah. Factual, please.
Yeah, it's gotta be factual.
I want it to be factual.
Actually, to be precise.
It has to be factual to be factical, I believe.
I feel like we've done this before. Didn't I already try to do, like, a what's a horror tactical RPG? This feels vaguely familiar to me.
It does also feel vaguely familiar. I feel like we've done a lot of tactical RPGs recently.
We have.
So I think you've done a lot of, like, how do I smash the tactical RPG into here?
I mean, like, a horror game with Norse mythology is pretty easy.
Yeah.
A horror game with Vikings, though, I know that they are not Vikings. A horror game with Vikings, like, creates some kind of Return of the Obra Dinn.
It's kind of Hellblade, too.
Ugh. All ideas have been had.
I was thinking also there's, like, you know, Darkest Dungeon is technically like a roguelike, but in between battles you, like, journey on your little caravan. So that kind of reminds me of both of them MASH, too, in terms of taking, like, the Oregon Trail parts.
Have we done a, like, Valhalla Zombies game? Is that something that already exists?
Valhalla Zombies.
Well, like, Valhalla is, like, you know, the hall where all these people go to after they die.
Yeah.
Like a Norse afterlife. But then, like, what if those people come back as zombies? I feel like there's something. I don't know if that's a very good mashup of these two games, to be honest, but I feel like there's something.
Oh, yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of, I think, horror potential to the idea of Valhalla in general. So
if we could just have a good moment where Odin plucks out his eye, that feels like horror enough for me.
That's just body horror. That's not.
That's enough.
Okay.
What's more horrifying than that?
All right.
I'd like to work in my dream world. This mashup works in the theme park in some way, like a Viking inspired
theme park. Yeah.
Here's the horror game. It's real life. You have been strapped onto the swinging ship ride, and you are never allowed to leave.
Oh. I don't think that'd be a very fun game.
It's
be
an
artsy.
ARG.
Be very artsy.
Yeah. That's my horror game. And there's a Viking themed theme park, and the Vikings rise from the dead.
Okay, so maybe you're like in like a really big theme park, like Disney World size theme park. And there's this, there's strange monsters around. We could make them zombies, I guess, or we could make them like...
They don't have to be zombies.
Some sort of zombie Norse mythology amalgamation thing, right? Just monsters.
Look up, do the Norse have zombies? Continue.
And you have like you're in a group, right? And the shelter point is like the Epcot ball or whatever the equivalent is in this made up theme park. So you have to like map out your route through the theme park and like take on various dangers along the way, where you have to make choices about who does certain things and how you get through certain obstacles. And then maybe there's like, you could do some fun like turn-based RPG maps, which the first Banner Saga got some criticism for very boring maps, so I'm pulling from later ones, I guess. But exciting battle maps with like theme park rides, I think. Like you could have fun little gimmicks to them.
I like that. Norse zombies are called Draugr.
Draugr, sure. A bunch of Draugr. And so you have to like make your way through the park to get to like the evacuation point or the shelter area or whatever, which is at like the center of the park. So you get like sort of the journey aspect, obviously a lot shorter than in Banner Saga, but still a journey. You get sort of your choices, and you get the theme park horror vibes as well.
You've cracked it.
There you go. I did it. I like it. I think it's good. We can add some crows in there, just for you, Madelyn.
Thanks. Some real crows would be nice.
Some really cute ones. Like, just totally out of step with the rest of the game. We'll have some really cute,
Can we have like a mascot?
Crows.
Can we have like a Onomichio Camelot like theme park mascot?
Sure. There's like a wandering mascot in the park that you can meet sometimes that's like a crow.
Like a really cute crow, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the merchant in Resident Evil 4, but a really cute crow.
Yeah. We've done it. I want to throw in my totally alternate separate idea, which is you're a person who has gone on a Viking LARP. Like a Viking, like...
A Viking LARP gone wrong?
Yeah, it turns out some of them are actually real Vikings from the dead.
I like that.
I don't think that's really a mashup of these two games.
No, but I like it anyway.
Just wanted to throw that out there.
You should pitch that to like, who made the Quarry and Until Dawn? Like Supermassive?
Yeah, Supermassive.
Just call them up and be like, Viking LARP gone wrong? What do you think?
Pitch. Viking LARP gone wrong with super cute mascot? On that note, listeners, what would you name your theme park ending in country? Like it would be X country. What would the name be? If you were going to make a game planned from the beginning to have 3 games in it, what would it be? Do you think that you could randomly put a Kickstarter up? I don't mean to denigrate the work that went into this. Do you think you could put a Kickstarter up and just 7 times your goal in the year of our Lord 2024? Are you waiting for the release of the first Factical RPG? If you have thoughts on this or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. Let us know if, after listening to this podcast, you start to see the Crow comic. I'm curious if your phone is listening to you. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat that Emma is preparing right now, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you want to subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere that you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Talk This. I've gotten so used to skipping Stitcher now that it came so naturally that I was afraid that TuneIn doesn't exist. And maybe it doesn't. I haven't checked. Next week is my side quest. It's going to be about reading.
Oh, the gamers won't like that.
It's going to be about learning to read things correctly. But Emma, what are we talking about in 2 weeks? Have you replenished the hat?
I did.
Wow.
And it has worked out well because 2 weeks from now, I guess I don't actually know if it'll still be going on, but I put this in the hat to be topical. And we'll talk about Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games.
Oh man, R.I.P.
Yeah. And for our new game, we will talk about Balatro.
I don't know anything about that one, but get ready to get sporty with us.
I'm worried that Balatro will consume you, so be careful.
Oh. Well, okay. On that note, listeners, thanks for tuning in, as always. Emma, as the person who came up with a good idea for the mashup, it is your responsibility to send people off feeling accomplished and good about the time spent.
This week, I hope that you have fun at the theme park